Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribed. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. He shouldered past me with a folder under his arm. Not now. I stepped into the doorway and felt him push. From the bed, Alina coughed once and went quiet. My daughter hovered behind him, jaw tight, eyes fixed. My chest knew this would not end clean. I'm Daniel, 46, and I learned late. Leave the paperwork, I told him, steady enough. He smiled like a waiter and lifted the folder. Alina asked for this. He tapped the cover twice. That tap sounded like a starter's gun. He tried to skirt me left, then right. I blocked both ways, palms up, voice low. Alina needs rest, I said, and my knuckles shook. Behind me, the floor creaked as my daughter shifted. The folder lifted again like a small blade. Alina watched us the way a witness watches. I moved closer to her and held the line. Show me first. I kept my hand open. He placed the folder on the dresser with care. He wanted my eyes away from his hands. I flipped the cover and saw blanks everywhere. Agent line empty, witness boxes lonely, stamp already inked. It read like a trap, neat and quick. My skin prickled as if the room narrowed. This was not care, this was leverage. You told me you'd help, my daughter murmured. She touched Alina's wrist, a soft plea. Alina slid her hand away and blinked slow. Later, she whispered, voice thin but stubborn. He flinched as if the schedule had moved. Simple update. He leaned on the dresser and waited. Medical proxy. He used the word like a key. Correction, I said, letting the word bite. He held my gaze for one long beat. His patience felt rehearsed and brittle. I looked closer and found the notary box. A number sat there, too clean for today. I snapped a photo with my phone and pocketed it. He noticed, shoulders rising like a cat about to strike. The air between us thickened with choices. Alina, I stepped aside so she saw me. You want this now? I kept it plain. Her lips formed no and her eyes hardened. My daughter heard it and went still. The boyfriend's smile returned, colder than before. He spoke softly for her alone, almost tender. You told me last week you were ready. Alina shifted, a small recoil, fingers knotting the sheet. I watched my daughter's face fall an inch. A private meeting just surfaced like a fin. Last week, I repeated, and my daughter stared down. He brought soup, her voice came out small. He wanted to explain rules and timelines. I felt the floor tilt under that word, timelines. Something ugly hid behind his calendar. I closed the folder and held it to my chest. He reached for it and met my forearm instead. Careful, I said, and we both heard the warning. He let his hand drop and laughed once. The laugh didn't reach anything human. Alina tapped the nightstand with 2 stiff taps. I opened it and found a folded slip. Her handwriting marked a number and yesterday's date. She watched me read and breathed faster. The number matched the stamp on the form. My daughter saw the match and backed away. You told me it was legal, she whispered. He didn't deny it, he didn't blink. Legal enough, he answered, voice flat as tile. Legal enough is how fires start. I stepped closer until he had to choose. He could push or he could talk. He chose talk, which told me plenty. Banks move fast before holidays, he murmured. He wanted our panic to finish his work. Alina, I kept my eyes on him, not her. We can call hospice and the nurse lead. She nodded once, the tiniest nod, then coughed. My daughter grabbed water and lifted the straw. Alina turned her face away from the glass. He sighed as if bored by oxygen. This is just timing, he looked at his watch. He wanted my daughter to hear the countdown. I let the silence stretch until it snapped. Your timing is off, I said and meant it. I called the number on the stamp right there. Speaker on, volume high, room holding its breath. A woman answered with crisp hello and caution. I gave the number and waited through static. That stamp was reported stolen, she said and paused. He didn't run, he smiled again, thinner, older. My daughter's hands trembled around the glass. Alina's eyes closed and then opened slow. I felt something lock in my spine. We were done treating him like a guest. I ended the call and slid the folder away. Leave, I made the word heavy and simple. He looked at my daughter instead of me. Your mother promised I could help, he tried. Help sounded like a bribe with a bow. My daughter stared at Alina, not at him. Did you promise? Her voice had a crack. Alina blinked twice and pressed my wrist. No promise, no permission, no daylight for him. The crack widened into a canyon. He straightened his shirt and exhaled through the nose. "You think this ends here?" he muttered. That was the first honest thing he offered. I moved to the door and opened it wide. The hallway waited like a witness ready to testify. He took one step, then another. Hen stopped. "Bank's call next," he said, testing for fear. I let the threat hang while my phone recorded. My daughter watched him as if mapping exits. Alina whispered my name and squeezed twice. "Go," I told him, and this time he went. The door clicked and I locked the top. My daughter wiped her eyes and looked away. Alina held my hand longer than usual. None of us believed this was over. I barred the door and dialed the nurse lead. "We need a lock on signatures today." My voice stayed even. "Understood." Clipboard clicks, then a promise to document refusals. I stood by Alina's bed until her breathing steadied. I knew the next move would not be quiet. My daughter wiped her face and looked at the hall. "He will come back," she whispered it like a fact. "We meet him at the threshold," I answered, jaw set. She nodded once and checked Alina's pulse with care. We both heard footsteps above us and froze. The neighbor knocked, 3 rapid taps, then a pause. "Packages for Alina." He lifted a cardboard cube toward me. I opened it on the console and stared inside. Printed forms, prepaid envelope, sticky note with his initials. My daughter swore under her breath and backed away. I took photos fast and sealed the box again. "Can you return this to the depot?" I asked. The neighbor glanced at my face and read the room. "Done." He tucked it under his arm and left. We had just announced that we were not asleep. Alina pointed to my pocket, then to her chest. I brought out my phone and opened voice memos. "Record," she rasped, then tapped my wrist twice. I held the mic near her and waited. She mouthed a name I had not heard before. Before I could ask, the doorbell buzzed once. Then twice, then a long press that rattled me. I killed the chime and stepped to the peephole. A courier uniform, a clipboard, a familiar grin. He looked straight into the lens like he owned it. I spoke through the intercom and kept it clipped. "Leave whatever you have on the mat." He smiled for the camera and adjusted the cap. "Signature required, healthcare delivery." He flashed a badge. The photo laminate lifted at the edge like tape. "No entry," I said, and pressed record on video. He kept the clipboard up and tried another angle. "It expires today." He checked an imaginary watch inside. "Come back with the nurse," I replied without blinking. His smile dropped a shade, then returned sharper. He leaned toward the mic and offered a deal. "I can notarize through the glass with witnesses." My daughter stepped beside me with her phone raised. "Perform it," she said, daring him to try. He drifted back 2 steps and glanced up the street. A car idled near the curb and flashed once. He glanced at it and licked his lip. I knew there was a camera in that car. I also knew they wanted proof of refusal. We were not going to hand them a storyline. I dialed our attorney and kept my voice low. "Emergency hold on medical proxies for Alina." On it, fast typing, then a crisp instruction. "Post a notice on the door and bedside." "Done," I answered, already reaching for tape. He saw the paper through the glass and laughed. "Cute." He made a little bow toward the lens. My daughter raised the volume and let him hear herself. "You are trespassing under a protective care order." He blinked twice and stopped bowing. Alina motioned with 2 fingers toward the window. She wanted to face him and not flinch. We wheeled her gently so she could see the porch. She lifted her hand and showed an open palm. 5 fingers, 5 witnesses required, not 2. He understood the gesture and cursed it under his breath. He walked to the idling car and leaned inside. Another man stepped out with a tablet and tripod. They started setting up like they owned the sidewalk. I felt pressure push against my ribs and stayed still. I rang the nurse lead again and handed over updates. "We have a filming attempt at our door." "Hold position," came back solid and calm. "Team en route with hospice administrator and social worker." My daughter exhaled and placed a chair against the door. The tablet lifted toward the window and started recording. He introduced himself like a host and pointed at us. He announced dates and accused us of obstructing care. The tripod partner nodded along and adjusted levels. They wanted a clip to scare a lender. I stepped into frame and displayed the notice. I read the attorney's line about contested authority. I named the stolen seal number for the camera. I described the call to verification with timestamp. Their smiles thinned as the record turned against them. My daughter held up the empty witness section. Alina chooses to delay, she said, eyes on lens. Alina nodded once for the video and touched her chest. She traced a small X and then a circle. No consent, not today, not under pressure. The partner lowered the tablet and muttered to his friend. They packed faster than they had set up. The car pulled forward and stopped halfway down. He stayed by the hedge and took a call. His shoulders sagged in tiny pulses like he was scolded. Police lights washed the curb and parked behind them. 2 officers stepped out and walked toward our gate. I opened the door a crack and held up my phone. We have documentation of a forged process. My voice felt steady and strange, like someone older. He tried charm on the officers first and failed. He tried outrage next and tripped on his own script. The partner kept quiet and stared at the tablet. An officer asked for IDs and took both away. I heard the short radio burst and braced for impact. They were not arrested, they were warned and released. But the officers wrote a report number and handed it over. "Expect contact from an investigator," one of them said. He stared at me over the officer's shoulder and smiled. The smile promised round 2 before dinner. The car rolled off but slowed at the corner. My daughter watched it turn and did not breathe. Alina squeezed my fingers and pointed at the clock. She tapped once for hurry and twice for plan. We had to outrun his next attempt by hours. I called the care agency and requested a sitter rotation. No solo shifts, no walk-ups, code word on entry. They agreed and texted confirmations to both phones. The nurse team arrived and checked Alina's vitals. She relaxed only when the clipboard hit the counter. While they worked, I drafted a short affidavit. I listed the delivery stunt and the fake badge. I attached the porch video and the neighbor package photos. I sent it to our attorney and to the nurse lead. I sent it to myself because I needed control. My daughter opened the pantry and pulled a shoebox. Inside lay our emergency cash and spare IDs. She pushed it toward me and kept her hand there. "We may need a hotel if he escalates." I hated the thought but loved her readiness. The doorbell buzzed again and then stopped. No one stood outside when I checked the lens. A text arrived from an unknown number seconds later. "Last chance for a smooth handoff." I typed back 3 words and hit send. "Counsel represents Alina." Delivered, read nothing for 10 long seconds. Then a reply that tasted like smoke. Then the lender decides by default. He wanted me to blink first and open the door. I placed my phone on speaker and called the lender line. Account security screen, hold music, then a human voice. "Freeze any actions tied to Alina," I requested. "We need an authenticated caller on file," the voice replied. I read the notice language word for word until silence. "Hold please," the line clicked and time dragged. My daughter stood with her ear near the speaker. Alina watched our faces and tightened her grip. "Action paused for 72 hours, the voice returned. We had bought a window, not safety. I hung up and pulled air deep into my chest. The porch camera pinged again with motion. The car had returned and idled with lights off. He did not step out this time, he waited. Predators test locks before they break them. I set a chair by the bed and met Alina's eyes. "We have 3 days to seal every gap." She touched my wrist and drew a short line. Then she added a dot like a period. "Finish it, no drift, no mercy tomorrow." Fists hammered the door before sunrise and boots scraped concrete. "Medical transport for Alina," a voice rang through the intercom. I checked the cam and saw 2 EMTs and a clipboard carrier. "Show the order to the lens," I said, already recording. A digital form flashed and a fake QR bled static. "We take her now or you obstruct care." My daughter lifted her phone and started a timer. Alina pointed at her chest and tapped twice for choice. "Who authorized this transfer?" I asked through the speaker. The carrier turned away and whispered to someone off-screen. I dialed hospice and kept my breath steady. "Confirm any transfer request for Alina right now." "None on file," came back tight and immediate. "Hold the team at the door," the nurse added. The EMTs glanced at each other and shifted weight. The carrier returned with a stiff smile and a threat. "Emergency escalation allows relocation without family approval." Read the basis line by line, I answered and waited. He eyed the cam and tried to skip ahead. Read it, I repeated, and the timer ticked louder. He read a doctor's name we didn't know. I texted the name to hospice and watched 3 dots. Forgery alert on that signature came back fast. The EMT stepped back half a pace and exhaled. The carrier tightened his jaw and looked past the lens. Elena lifted her palm toward the door like a stop sign. No move, she rasped, then pointed at me. The EMTs listened and lowered their hands. We need written refusal, one of them offered gently. I held up yesterday's notice and let them read. A car engine revved near the curb installed. I glanced at the cam and caught his face in profile. He stayed behind the van and spoke into a phone. My daughter's screen lit with a new message. Final attempt before guardianship hearing, the text read. I opened a group call with hospice and our attorney. Recording is active, I announced for the doorway audience. State your authority for this removal, the attorney asked. The carrier froze and glanced toward the curb again. Silence stretched and finally broke with a quick retreat. They loaded the empty stretcher and rolled it away. The van pulled off, then slowed half a block. He remained in the shadows and watched our windows. We held still until the street went quiet. I knew quiet meant setup, not safety. The landline rang with a blocked number and urgency. Adult Protective Services, a woman introduced in clipped tones. A report claims Elena is denied medication and access. Send a team here, I answered without flinching. Bring your supervisor and a camera, I added for clarity. Before they arrived, Elena tugged my sleeve and traced letters. NOTHISNAME she wanted me to see. I wrote it down and recognized a former coworker of his. My daughter's jaw set and her eyes sharpened. She began digging through old texts with surgical focus. APS showed up with badges and straight questions. We opened every drawer they requested and kept filming. Hospice staff arrived and narrated meds and schedules. Elena reached for water and took 2 careful sips. What happens next? She whispered, not asking for comfort. The APS lead reviewed our footage on the porch cam. She paused on the transport stunt in the blocked QR. Her expression shifted from neutral to alarmed. We will escalate this to fraud and intimidation. The words landed like anchors and steadied the room. My daughter's phone buzzed again and stayed on the table. He was calling with a private number and no patience. She answered on speaker and kept her voice flat. Stop chasing transfers, she told him in one breath. He laughed once and promised paperwork from another channel. Which channel? I asked, stepping closer to the mic. He hesitated and then dropped the name Elena had traced. I lifted the note so the APS lead could see. She typed the name into her tablet and frowned. Connected to earlier investigations, she murmured, then met my eyes. He realized he had said too much and hung up. My daughter stared at the screen like it had burned her. He used my email for a proxy request, she breathed. She opened settings and found an unfamiliar forwarding rule. Her hands shook as she deleted it and wiped tears. I called the bank's fraud desk and asked for audit logs. We need to see every access attempt tied to Elena. Manual review in progress, the agent replied after a beat. 2 failures from a retail hotspot near your address. A hotspot meant proximity, not guesswork. A soft knock landed at the side door. The neighbor leaned in with his cap in hand. Someone took photos of your mailbox an hour ago. He showed a blurry shot of a man bending low. The posture matched our problem like a signature. We moved Elena's records into a locked case. No descriptions, no chatter, only motion and purpose. I placed a fresh notice over the file shelf. The hospice admin countersigned and snapped a picture. Every step turned into evidence by design. APS finished their walkthrough and issued a verbal warning. Any further contact must go through our office. They handed me a printout with a case number. My daughter photographed it and sent it to counsel. We were stacking bricks while he threw smoke. The door camera chimed again with a milder tone. A delivery drone drifted into the frame and hovered. A padded pouch lowered toward the welcome mat. I used the megaphone and ordered it to abort. The drone paused, then zipped upward like a startled fish. I cut open the pouch with gloves and no flare. Inside lay a flash drive with a cheeky label. The hospice admin scanned it on a sandbox tablet. A crude form popped up and demanded an e-signature. We photographed everything and slid it into evidence. My daughter leaned against the wall and stared at Alina. "I brought this chaos into her room," she whispered. Alina lifted her knuckles and knocked twice with courage. Then she pressed my hand and drew a small arc. "Forward only, no guilt detours today." I stepped onto the porch and called him from my phone. He answered on the first ring with a tight voice. "Meet me at the diner in 1 hour," I said. "Bring whatever you claim proves authority." He paused and then agreed with a clipped yes. This was bait, not surrender, and I knew the risk. I notified APS, hospice, and our attorney in one text. The plan fit in a single line and a location. 2 unmarked vehicles would sit within eyeshot. My pulse steadied because action beats fear. My daughter watched Alina while I rehearsed questions. No speeches, no rants, only verification and timestamps. I packed a recorder and a spare battery. I wrote 4 bullet points on my palm. One of them was his real goal. When I left, Alina gripped my wrist and would not release. Her gaze held mine long enough to plant a warning. I understood it without words and nodded once. If he pivoted to guardianship, he would strike fast. I closed the door and walked toward the test. I reached the booth first and chose the seat facing exits. He walked in alone and kept his hands visible. A plastic envelope slid across the table toward me. "Proof," he said, and watched my pulse. I kept my wrists flat and didn't blink. Inside sat a consent page with 2 shaky initials. The date was today and the code matched nothing. "Where did you get this?" I asked without looking up. "Remote session." He tapped the table twice like a metronome. My jaw locked because I knew whose hand he borrowed. "Show the recording," I said, and put my phone down. He hesitated, then opened a clip with muted sound. Alina's face filled the frame from a low angle. A stylus dragged weak letters while a cursor guided it. My throat worked as the cursor moved ahead of her. Paused frames, I pointed and spread my fingers wide. "You edited out prompts," I added and leaned in. He lifted one shoulder and checked the door. "Court trust timestamps," he murmured like a prayer. My fist tightened around calm that wanted to break. A waitress appeared with water and a practiced smile. "We'll order after," I said with a nod. He let the silence hang and tested my patience. "Guardianship hearing, 36 hours, he watched my eyes. He expected flinch and got focus instead. "You need 3 independent witnesses," I said, voice level. "Online counts now," he scratched his neck and smirked. "Only if the platform is accredited," I replied. He swallowed and closed the clip without arguing. A small crack opened in his confidence. "Why keep pushing?" I asked, and kept the rhythm slow. He studied the ceiling and rubbed his knuckles. "Debt feels lighter when someone else pays." The line sat there like a dare to judge. I heard myself decide not to. "You hurt the wrong person," I told him anyway. He leaned closer until we shared the same air. "She promised me access if I eased her pain." He blinked after saying it, like surprise at honesty. My ribs tightened against a complicated ache. "Put that in writing," I said, and slid a pad. "Word for word, no fluff, signature at the end." He stared at the blank page and chewed the pen cap. "Immunity," he whispered, not looking at me. "You're not getting that here," I answered without heat. He began writing, and the letters started uneven. The first line named the app used for signatures. The second line mentioned a code he claimed to own. The third line described 3 helpers I had not met. I circled the app and took a photo for counsel. The front door chimed and my spine went rigid. 2 men in contractor vests entered and scanned the room. They split without ordering and posted near the restrooms. He saw them too and closed the pad with one hand. I touched the recorder just to feel it running. "Your friends?" I asked, and kept my tone dull. He shook his head and laced his fingers together. "They watch me in case I fold." He shifted in the booth and looked suddenly smaller. Desperation leaked through the act like steam. "Finish the page," I said, and he obeyed. When he signed, the pen left a blot of ink. I slid the paper into my jacket and stood. "Copy for you after verification," I told him. His eyes flickered between my face and the door. "Tell them I cooperated," he said under his breath. I nodded once because it cost nothing. The vests watched me walk toward the register. I paid for nothing and kept the receipt anyway. Outside, a breeze hit hard enough to feel like warning. I called my daughter before crossing the lot. Get Alina on camera with the nurse. We're ready, her voice held nerves and grit. Phrase is simple, no consent today, repeat it slowly. She repeated it back like a drill. The vests followed at a distance and pretended not to. I led them toward the corner where cars idled. The unmarked sedan blinked once and stayed silent. I veered left and entered a pharmacy instead. They stayed outside and talked into their sleeves. In the back aisle, I opened a secure chat. I sent the signed page and the video clip. Counsel responded with one sentence and a location. File temporary block at the courthouse now. My heel turned before I finished reading. The courthouse lobby had a metal detector and a slow line. I texted the clerk our arrival and request number. A deputy glanced at the envelope and waved me through. He had seen this dance and didn't like it. I didn't either, but I was getting good at it. While I waited, my phone buzzed twice fast. My daughter sent a short video of Alina repeating. No permission, no transfer, I choose to stay. The nurse nodded in frame and timestamped the clip. I saved it in 3 places before breathing again. The clerk called my number and looked at the page. Handwritten admission with names and tools, she read. She stapled my affidavit to it with brisk efficiency. Judge will see this within the hour, she said. A door opened somewhere deeper, and I felt momentum shift. Leaving the building, I saw him across the street. No vests now, just him and a phone at his ear. He watched me and mouthed the word soon. I raised 2 fingers without expression and kept walking. He hated not knowing whether that meant victory or trap. Halfway home, the camera app pinged a new clip. A caregiver stood at our threshold with today's code word. Good, the rotation worked before he tried another angle. Then a van rolled past slowly and did not stop. The same van from morning, but with different plates. My daughter texted again with a new alert. Unknown account opened a portal using Alina's number. I told her to kill the line with the carrier. She replied done and sent a screenshot of the change. Another doorway slammed shut while his options thinned. I crossed the last block and rounded our fence. The neighbor met me halfway with raised eyebrows. Car circled twice, then parked behind the store. He tapped his wrist and pointed toward the alley. I nodded, then looked at the window where Alina rested. Inside, Alina lifted her hand when I entered. 2 taps, then a small circle in the air. We were close to the center of his plan. I took the chair and squeezed her fingers. The doorbell rang once, then rang again. The bell blasted again and a fist hit the glass. Emergency hearing service, a voice barked through the slot. An envelope waved at the lens with a court crest. Open or we post and proceed without you. I slid the chain and let the door breathe an inch. Hold it to the camera, I told the slot. He flattened the papers and tried to block the header. I snapped a photo and zoomed past his thumb. Ex parte with a rush co. Doing a docket time. They were racing the clock to grab control. My daughter tightened her grip on the handle. Do we accept? She asked under her breath. Through the mail slot only, I answered and nodded. He shoved the packet through and filmed my hands. I returned the stare until his phone dropped a little. Alina raised 3 fingers toward the sitter by the bed. The sitter started recording from a second angle. I read the first page out loud for the room. Temporary guardian request by a third party with initials. The initials matched his contact on my daughter's phone. I called the clerk and pressed speaker so all could hear. Confirm this hearing exists right now. Yes, came the reply and a courtroom number. Opposition filed last hour is in the file. Relief hit and evaporated because time still moved. The service runner lingered on the steps and made a call. I pulled the door shut and threw the deadbolt. My daughter checked the window and whispered into her mic. He's stalling for backup, she muttered with steady breath. We both knew the second wave would be louder. Alina tapped my wrist hard and traced a square. She wanted the tablet for a live statement. I brought it near and opened the secure link. The nurse framed her face and counted us in. Alina cleared her throat and chose each word like a stone. I refuse substitute decision makers today. She paused and pressed her palm to her chest. I choose my existing plan until I say otherwise. The nurse mirrored the lines for clarity and timestamps. I saved 3 copies while adrenaline burned clean. Footsteps scraped the steps and 2 new men appeared. They wore suits and carried briefcases without logos. Voluntary interview before the hearing, one announced at the door. Decline, I said and raised my phone to eye level. The second man smiled without humor and backed away. A text hit from our attorney with one directive. Dial into the judge's line early and request standby. I connected and waited through an automated roll call. Opposing party joined with a distorted voice and no video. The judge entered with a clipped greeting and a countdown. State the emergency, the judge prompted the other side. A vulnerable adult is being isolated and misled. What is your relationship? The judge asked without warmth. Future family member, the voice answered after a beat. Non-committal and slippery, exactly like we expected. Respondent, the judge turned to our line. Do you have evidence from the patient today? I unmuted and handed the tablet to the nurse. Alina repeated her refusal and showed the sitter on screen. The judge requested the video be filed within the hour. Opposing audio sputtered with a wild new claim. Pain management is being withheld to force compliance. The nurse held up the medication log to the camera. Doses read in a calm rhythm with numbers and times. The judge's tone flattened and cut off the interruption. Service is acknowledged, the judge continued with pace. Any sign changes dated this week are suspended. I felt my lungs inflate for the first time all day. Opposing voice tried one more tactic and choked on silence. Full hearing in 10 days, the judge concluded and clicked off. Silence lasted 1 second and then my phone rang. Unknown number with the same area code as the docket. I answered and heard him breathing like he had run. You just cost me my last chance, he whispered. I cost you a shortcut, I returned and kept it level. I still have her promise, he insisted with a hitch. Bring it to court, I said and ended the call. My hands shook and then steadied on the frame. My daughter watched me for a sign of doubt. I gave her a small nod because we had none left. Knuckles hit the side door with a polite rhythm. The neighbor stepped in with a folded printout. Caught a plate behind the store, he reported quietly. He handed me a photo with numbers and a timestamp. The same van with a throwaway tag pointing nowhere. I forwarded the image to the investigator from APS. Logging this vehicle with associated event times, she replied. Then another text from her came fast and short. Separate report linked to your address from a clinic. A clinic meant another angle we hadn't blocked yet. I called the clinic and asked for their on-call lead. Who authorized a release for Alina today? Request came from a digital portal using a proxy email. They read the email slowly and waited for my reaction. It was my daughter's handle with one letter swapped. We reset portal access while the clinic froze outgoing files. I dictated a one-line revocation that required fresh passwords. The lead confirmed and promised a fraud ticket by end of day. I thanked her and watched my daughter's shoulders settle. Score 1 and still the car idled somewhere close. The side gate latch clicked and the sitter stiffened. I opened the rear camera feed and widened T. He view. A teenager with a bike glanced around and lifted our bin lid. He slid a small parcel under the liner and rode off. I felt my stomach drop because that was not trash. Gloves on, phone rolling, I lifted the liner with care. A prepaid smartphone sat wrapped in clear tape. The screen lit with an incoming call from unknown. I answered on speaker at arm's length and waited. His voice poured out bright and falsely cheerful. Put me near Alina so I can apologize. My daughter stepped forward and blocked the mic. Apologize to the camera, she suggested and crossed her arms. He chuckled and tried a different tone like a salesman. Check the photos on that phone first. I opened the gallery and scrolled through 30 images. Alina on a couch in a clinic I didn't recognize. A nurse in the frame who wasn't on our roster. A wall sign showing a different county's logo and address. He had taken her to a consultation when we didn't know it. My jaw clenched as the timeline hit me like a bar. These were from the week before the first knock. He had been seeding evidence for weeks to claim diligence. Each image had metadata with geotags and minutes. He wanted to prove involvement before we slammed doors. You don't get to rewrite her choices, I told the phone. Courts love continuity, he replied with a smug rumble. I stared at the timestamps and saw his pattern. Every visit captured a signature attempt that barely failed. He had been circling for the cleanest edit. Bring the nurse from those photos to testify, I said. Silence bit at the line for a long beat. She doesn't work there anymore, he offered too quickly. Then a click and the call died into static. He had lost an anchor and knew it. I turned to Alina and kept my voice soft. Do you remember that room? I asked with my hands. She tapped once and then drew a shallow wave. Sometimes yes and sometimes blurred, that was the truth. We would need the building's logs before he scrubbed them. I called the clinic back and requested security footage. The lead connected me to facilities after 2 transfers. Hold the recordings around the dates in these images. She asked for a case number and I read ours. Copy we will preserve pending subpoena, she replied. Footsteps returned at the front with a third knock. This time the visitor spoke our code word without stumbling. I checked the app and saw the nurse on duty. I opened the door for her and stepped aside. Behind her stood a plainclothes investigator with a badge. We're filing a temporary restraining order request now. He reviewed our videos on his tablet and whistled low. Whoever is coaching him knows weak spots in intake. He asked Alina 2 short questions and thanked her gently. Then he looked at me like a teammate who had seen enough. Tonight he tries a wellness check through a different agency. How do you know? I asked with tight breath. Pattern across 2 other households this month, he answered. He gave me a script for the next call word for word. It ended with a request for a supervising officer on record. As if cued by prophecy, the landline rang again. Community crisis team, a calm baritone announced politely. A concerned party requested a safety visit for Alina. I read the script and asked for the supervisor by name. A pause followed, then a click, then a reset greeting. The supervisor came online with cooler cadence. We will not enter without medical staff present and consent. He logged the case number and marked the address protected. Then he offered something I didn't expect or trust yet. We can flag her record to block duplicate requests. Alina's shoulders loosened and she drifted towards sleep. I held her hand while my daughter watched the hall. The investigation team packed with careful speed and purpose. The nurse adjusted equipment and mouthed, "Call me anytime." The room finally felt like ours, but only for now. My phone vibrated with one more alert before dusk. Courthouse docket updated with our temporary block stamped. A short line confirmed the suspension of surprise filings. I read it twice because relief can be a trick. Then the street camera pinged with motion and a silhouette froze. He stood across the road with nothing in his hands. No crew, no props, just him and the look of loss. He stared at our window and waited for me to blink. I didn't. I lifted the phone and captured his face. He turned away slowly like a man choosing his next weapon. I called the investigator and moved to the porch. Across the street, he lingered like a dare. Now, I said into the phone, eyes on him. 2 unmarked cars slid into view without sirens. He turned his head, then chose not to run. The first officer approached with measured steps and distance. Hands visible, calm tone, palms lifted. They asked his name and the borrowed one slipped out. A second officer read a case number into her mic. He glanced at my window. W and swallowed hard. My daughter stood beside Alina with the tablet ready. I joined them as the door stayed locked from habit. We pushed the final record, I told the nurse. Alina pressed my wrist and nodded once. Her grip steadied me more than the badge. On camera, Alina repeated a clean refusal without shaking. She added one sentence I hadn't heard before. I appoint Daniel and my granddaughter as watchers. The nurse countersigned and stamped the entry timestamp. I understood what watcher meant and felt the weight. Outside, a courier approached the officers with a folder. He claimed urgent filings from a private clerk. The investigator opened it with gloved hands and frowned. Inside lay blank witness lines and a stolen seal again. The courier stared at the pavement and didn't deny it. I stepped out with the earlier diner confession copied. The investigator compared names and tools, then raised his brow. These match. He photographed the page and the courier's badge. He turned to the man across the street without blinking. Stay where you are, he warned, voice iron. My daughter's phone buzzed with a fresh alert. Account change attempt from a retail hotspot. I called the carrier and requested a forced reset. Verified, the rep locked the number for 90 days. Another door closed while he lost leverage. He tried one last angle with the officers listening. Alina asked me to manage her discharge comfort. The nurse stepped forward and held up today's log. Doses, vitals, response notes, nothing missing. The officer's jaw flexed as the story collapsed. A plainclothes detective arrived with a small printer. He gathered our clips and the porch footage into a packet. Initial charges for fraud and coercion, he announced steadily. The man across the street stared at the ground. He looked relieved and ruined at the same time. They cuffed him without spectacle and walked him to the car. He didn't fight, he didn't speak. He turned once toward the house and searched the window. Alina lifted her hand and closed her fingers slowly. That tiny gesture cut deeper than any sentence. After they left, the investigator stayed by the gate. Expect noise from his contacts, he warned quietly. We will monitor the case and the clinics. He gave my daughter a direct number for nights. I stored it where I keep the worst news. Alina drifted to sleep while the nurse adjusted lines. My daughter sat on the floor and leaned on the frame. I thought I broke us, she whispered without looking up. You didn't, I answered, and my voice didn't shake. We watched the empty street like it might answer back. The porch camera pinged once more with motion. Only the neighbor walking his dog, eyes on our windows. He raised a thumb and kept moving down the block. Normal life tried to step back into the room. I didn't trust it yet, and maybe that saved us.